It was one of those mornings that started off just like any other, quiet and calm with the sound of birds singing outside the window and sunlight spilling into the kitchen. I had no idea that within an hour, I would walk into one of the biggest, most unexpected messes I had ever seen in my life, and that same mess would somehow bring me closer to my son than I had felt in a long while. My son, Ethan, was 12 years old at the time, and he had always been curious and adventurous in his own little ways. He had this natural desire to try things on his own, even if it meant failing a few times. Still, when it came to the kitchen, I had always been careful with him. He loved watching cooking shows and insisted he would one day be able to make pancakes better than the chefs on TV, but I never quite imagined him trying it without me standing close by. That morning, I decided to sleep in just a little longer. I usually woke up early to prepare breakfast, but the week had been exhausting with work, errands, and household chores piling up. I figured an extra 30 minutes of rest wouldn't hurt anyone. Ethan, however, had an entirely different plan in mind. While I was still curled under the blankets, he tiptoed out of his room, determined to make breakfast for me all on his own. When I finally stirred awake, something unusual caught my attention. There was a faint smell drifting through the house, and at first, I couldn't quite place it. It wasn't the fresh, inviting aroma of pancakes or bacon that I normally prepared. No, this was something else, something smoky, something that carried the hint of, well, chaos. I hurried out of bed, tied my robe, and rushed toward the kitchen. What greeted me at the doorway stopped me in my tracks. My jaw fell open as I took in the scene before me. The counters were absolutely covered in flour. Eggshells were scattered across the sink and dripping into the drain. A carton of milk had tipped over on the counter, spilling into a sticky puddle that was now dripping down onto the floor. On the stove, a frying pan sat unattended, filled with what I could only describe as an overcooked experiment of scrambled eggs that had gone far past golden yellow and straight into brown. And there, right in the middle of it all, stood Ethan. His hair was sticking out in every direction, his hands were covered in flour, and his oversized apron hung crookedly around his little frame. He froze when he saw me, wide-eyed like a deer caught in headlights.
Mom.
"You weren't supposed to wake up yet," he blurted, his voice a mix of panic and disappointment.
I should have been upset at the mess.
I should have scolded him for turning my kitchen upside down. But as I stood there watching my son, so earnest, so determined, and so terribly messy, I felt my lips tugging into a smile I couldn't hold back. "What exactly are you doing, young man?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was overwhelmed by the disaster. He looked down at his feet, his cheeks turning red. I wanted to make you breakfast. You always make food for me, and I thought maybe today I could surprise you. But he gestured helplessly at the disaster around him. It didn't go like I thought. Something in my heart softened immediately. My son, at just 12 years old, had tried to do something so sweet, even though it had ended in chaos. I walked over and placed a hand on his flour-dusted shoulder. "Ethan, you made a mess, yes. But you also tried to do something really thoughtful. And that means more to me than a perfect breakfast ever could." His eyes lit up just a little, though he still looked embarrassed. "Really? Really," I assured him, giving his shoulder a squeeze. We spent the next 30 minutes side by side, cleaning up the flour and wiping down the counters. Every time I reached for something, Ethan would grab the sponge or towel before I could, determined to fix what he had messed up. At one point, I couldn't help laughing when he tried to wipe the spilled milk but only managed to smear it around even more. He laughed too, and soon we were both giggling like we hadn't in weeks. Once the kitchen was somewhat restored, I turned to him and said, "How about we try this again? Together this time?" Ethan's face brightened instantly.
Yes, please.
"I want to learn." And so we began again. I showed him how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, how to stir gently, and how to keep an eye on the stove so nothing burned. His small hands fumbled a few times, and more flour ended up on the counter than in the batter, but this time it didn't matter. The kitchen was filled with laughter, and for once, I didn't care about the mess. Finally, Ethan plated the scrambled eggs and toast he had helped make, setting it down in front of me with the biggest grin. It's not perfect, he said shyly. I picked up my fork, took a dramatic bite, and let my eyes widen as if I had just tasted the most delicious meal in the world. Oh my goodness, I exclaimed, pretending to fan myself. This is the best breakfast I've ever had. Ethan's laughter filled the kitchen, and he gave me a look that I'll never forget, a look of pure joy, relief, and pride. You don't have to lie, Mom, he teased, but I shook my head. I'm not lying, I told him honestly. It really is perfect, because you made it. After breakfast, Ethan leaned against me with a sigh of contentment. I wanted to make you happy, he whispered. I wrapped my arm around him and kissed the top of his head. You did more than that. You reminded me that the little things matter most. And this moment, means the world to me. As I held him close, I realized something important. Life is often messy, just like that kitchen had been. But sometimes, it's in the messes that we find the most beautiful memories. Ethan's attempt at breakfast hadn't gone the way he had hoped, but it had turned into a story I would cherish for the rest of my life. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about the food. It was about love, effort, and the bond between a mother and her son. And that, to me, was the sweetest surprise of all.